The cold air always hit first, a sharp intake that felt less like breathing and more like being punched in the lungs. It was the same air that filled the space between us, thin and brittle, carrying the echo of words spoken just moments before, words that had stripped the paint from my world and left it bare, ugly. He stood there, framed by the doorway he was walking out of forever, and the cruel curve of his lip was the last thing I'd remember of his face for a long, long time. He hadn't even raised his voice. That was the worst part. Just a calm, clinical dissection of everything I thought we were, finishing with the line, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. "You'll never find another man like me." The words didn't just hang in the air. They solidified, turning into tiny, sharp shards that embedded themselves under my skin. He actually believed it. Believed his specific brand of selfish, careless disregard was irreplaceable. Believed his betrayal somehow made him unique, superior. I just stood there, the floorboards vibrating slightly under my feet, the quiet of the house suddenly deafening, watching the space where he used to be, feeling the void where my future had been. The silence after he left wasn't empty. It was filled with the buzzing frequency of those 7 terrible words, looping endlessly in my skull. If you've ever felt like the ground disappeared beneath you, like the words someone said became a physical weight pressing down, tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life had been quiet before. A steady hum. Predictable, comfortable. We had built a house together, filled it with furniture that matched, pictures on the walls that told a story we both thought was ours. There were routines. Coffee in the morning, the clink of dishes after dinner, the shared silence of reading in the same room. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was solid. It felt like bedrock. I worked. He worked. We planned small trips, talked about maybe renovating the kitchen one day, speculated on what retirement might look like decades down the line. There was a sense of shared purpose, a quiet confidence in the path we were walking. He was him. Ambitious in his career, sometimes preoccupied, but I saw it as dedication. He was good at what he did, respected, moving up the corporate ladder at a steady clip. I was proud of him. I trusted him. Trust felt like the foundation of everything. Without grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, we had built a life that felt sturdy, safe. It was the kind of life you settled into, believing it would simply continue, linear and uninterrupted, until the end. The world outside our walls had its chaos, its noise, but inside, there was this curated peace, this shared space that felt immune. The first crack was tiny. A late night at the office became 2, then 3. Explanations were vague, plausible. Long hours. Big project. Increased workload. It's what ambitious people did, right? Push themselves. I didn't pry. I supported. Made sure dinner was waiting, or the fridge was stocked for late-night snacks. Offered back rubs when he seemed stressed. I was the supportive partner, the steady anchor, while he navigated the choppy waters of his career. The hum of life started to feel a little off-key, but I attributed it to the temporary stress. A phase. It would pass. He was just working hard for us, for the future we were building. That's what I told myself. That's what I believed. Then came the email. An accident. Left open on his laptop, which he'd forgotten to take with him one morning. A subject line that snagged my attention, innocuous enough at first glance, something about a meeting. But the content was a fist to the gut. Not about work at all. Intimate, casual, a thread of conversation that spoke of shared nights and whispered plans, written in a tone that was unmistakable. Playful, secretive, us but not with me. The world didn't stop. The sun didn't fall from the sky. The house didn't collapse. But inside me, everything shattered. It wasn't just words on a screen. It was the dismantling of my reality, piece by piece. Every late night suddenly made sense. Every vague answer snapped into chilling focus. The quiet hum of our life didn't just go off-key. It died, replaced by a high-pitched shriek inside my head. When he came home that night, I was waiting. The email was on the kitchen counter, glowing accusation from the laptop screen. He saw it, and for a split second, the mask dropped. Panic flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by something cold, defensive. There was no tearful confession, no desperate plea for forgiveness. Just a shrug, a sigh that seemed to convey annoyance more than remorse. And then the minimizing. It didn't mean anything, just stress relief.
A mistake.
A momentary lapse. The casual dismissal was another blow. It wasn't just the betrayal of the act, it was the betrayal of the subsequent conversation, the lack of any real understanding of the depth of the wound he'd inflicted. He made it sound like I was overreacting. And then the words, the final, cutting pronouncement as he walked away, leaving me in the wreckage. You'll never find another man like me. The early days were a blur of pain and practicalities. Phone calls to lawyers, sorting through joint accounts, the surreal experience of dividing a life that felt indivisible just days before. Every object in the house seemed tainted, a reminder of a lie. The sofa we watched movies on, the kitchen table where we ate breakfast, even the bed, now vast and empty, echoed with absence and betrayal. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were haunted by his face, his voice, those 7 words. The silence in the house was no longer just quiet. It was oppressive, heavy with unshed tears and unspoken accusations. Friends tried to help, offering comfort, meals, a listening ear. But there was a loneliness that no amount of company could penetrate. The specific loneliness of having your most intimate connection severed, of being fundamentally misunderstood and dismissed by the person you thought knew you best. I felt adrift, untethered. The world he described, the one where I was uniquely blessed by his presence and doomed to a lesser existence without him, started to feel terrifyingly real. Every time I had to sign a document, every time a lawyer used clinical terms like asset division or spousal support, it felt like another layer of skin being peeled away. He wasn't making it easy. There were disputes over trivial things, drawn-out negotiations that felt designed to punish me, to make this process as painful and prolonged as possible. His passive aggression bled into everything. He still believed he held the cards, that this was inconvenient for him, but ultimately my loss. The financial strain was immediate. Our combined income had been comfortable. Mine alone was a less so. I had to budget, to cut back. It felt like a regression, like all the progress we'd made together had been erased, and I was back scrambling, just to stay afloat. And always, those words echoed. You'll never find another man like me. He meant someone as successful, as desirable as him. And in the dark hours, when the loneliness pressed in, when the bills piled up, a terrifying whisper in my mind wondered if he was right. Had I peaked? Was this it? Was this the consequence of daring to lose him? Dating felt like a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. The apps were a wasteland of profiles that felt either fake or profoundly depressing. Meeting people in person was awkward, fraught with the unspoken history I carried. How much do you reveal? When do you tell them you're recently divorced because your husband cheated? How do you explain that the last person you trusted implicitly fundamentally broke you? The vulnerability was terrifying. And every conversation felt like an implicit comparison. Was this man kind? Was he stable? Was he like him? The comparison wasn't seeking a replica, but trying to understand what he had that made him think he was irreplaceable and what they had that proved him wrong. Most dates went nowhere. Some were actively bad. I started to retreat, to build walls. It felt safer being alone than risking another crack in the already fractured foundation of my self-worth. The thought of navigating intimacy again felt exhausting, impossible. The rising challenges weren't just external, they were internal. The battle against cynicism, against the belief that everyone was capable of such casual cruelty, against the haunting resonance of his parting words. The crisis deepened. The divorce proceedings dragged on, more contentious than they needed to be. His lawyer was aggressive, pushing for terms that felt punitive. He seemed determined to make me pay, not just for leaving, but for daring to disrupt his life. There were moments when I felt utterly defeated, drowning in paperwork and legal jargon, and the sheer emotional exhaustion of fighting for my own future against someone who knew all my weak points. I started to question my own judgment, my own worth. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe that's why he'd looked elsewhere. The rational part of my brain screamed that his choices were his own, a reflection of his character, not mine. But the emotional part, the bruised and battered part, was susceptible to the insidious whisper of doubt. His words, "You'll never find another man like me," had mutated. They no longer sounded arrogant. They sounded like a prophecy, a curse. I saw him occasionally in glimpses around town, or heard things through the grapevine. He seemed fine, unscathed, moving on effortlessly, while I felt stuck in the mud, fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. The disparity felt profoundly unfair. Then, unexpected, a flicker. Through a mutual acquaintance, I met Daniel. He wasn't the type I would have sought out. Quieter, perhaps, less flashy than the men I'd gravitated towards in the past. But he was kind, genuinely kind. He listened. He remembered things I told him. There was a steadiness about him, a calm that felt like an antidote to the chaos I'd been living. Our first few dates were tentative, cautious. I was guarded, wary of revealing too much, too soon. He was patient. He didn't push. He just was there. Present. Consistent. It was a slow, quiet build. No fireworks, no dramatic declarations. Just comfortable silence, easy conversation, a growing sense of ease in his presence. This was the midpoint shift. Not a sudden cure, but the first real sign that healing was possible. A hint of sunlight breaking through the perpetual gray. It wasn't about replacing my ex. It was about finding connection again, proving to myself that I was capable of being seen and valued by someone else. The fear was still there, the echo of his words a faint hum in the background, but Daniel's presence started to soften their edges. As our relationship grew, I learned more about him. He was successful, yes, but not in the showy, self-promoting way I was used to. He was sharp, insightful, respected. He worked in the corporate world, specifically in a large, well-known company. We talked about work sometimes, shared frustrations, and small victories. He spoke about his colleagues, his team, the challenges of leadership. He mentioned restructuring, optimizing performance, making tough calls. It sounded familiar, the kind of corporate jargon I'd heard for years, but from a different perspective, the one at the top, not the middle. He never mentioned my ex by name, or perhaps he did, and the name meant nothing to me in that context. Their paths hadn't directly crossed in a way I would have known. The turning point came subtly at first, then with a jolt of electric recognition. We were talking about his company, a specific project he was overseeing, and he mentioned the department involved, the manager in charge. The name. It clicked. It couldn't be. The company name was the same. The department was the same. The manager's name was him. My ex-husband. I froze. My blood ran cold, then rushed through my veins. I tried to keep my face neutral, to not betray the seismic shift happening inside me. Asked a casual question, confirming the details, the exact structure. Yes. It was him. Daniel was talking about my ex-husband as his subordinate. The man who had declared me irreparable and undesirable was reporting to the man who now saw me, cherished me, built a new future with me. The irony was so profound, so breathtaking, it felt like fiction. Those 7 words, meant to diminish and haunt me, suddenly took on a spectacular, bitter new meaning. You'll never find another man like me, he was right, of course. I hadn't found another man like him. I had found a man who was everything he wasn't, kind, stable, honest, and, oh, the glorious, exquisite twist, his superior. My internal landscape shifted completely in that moment. The lingering self-doubt, the fear, the pain of his betrayal didn't vanish, but they were suddenly dwarfed by a sense of potent, quiet power. It wasn't revenge I felt, not exactly. It was vindication. A profound, cosmic correction. The universe delivering a punchline only I could truly appreciate. I didn't reveal my connection to Daniel right away. I needed time to process, to let the full weight of the situation sink in. I needed to decide what this meant, how I would navigate it. This wasn't just about my healing anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about facing him not from a place of hurt, but from a place of undeniable strength. The turning point wasn't just meeting Daniel, it was realizing who he was and understanding the power dynamic that had unknowingly shifted in my favor. It was deciding, with a newfound steel in my spine, that I would face the past on my own terms. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with anticipation. The annual company gala, a mandatory event for all management, which meant he would be here. Daniel, my husband now for 6 months, held my hand, his grip firm and comforting. He knew the situation, of course. I had told him everything, the full painful story, the lingering sting of those words. He hadn't gloated, hadn't even seemed particularly surprised by my ex's character flaws. He had simply listened, his gaze steady, and then held me closer. He understood that tonight wasn't about him asserting dominance. It was about me standing tall, on my own 2 feet, with the man I chose, in front of the man who thought I was worthless. We walked into the ballroom, the murmur of conversation washing over us. Crystal chandeliers glittered, reflecting off polished floors. Everyone was dressed impeccably, a sea of polite smiles and calculated networking. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I scanned the room, looking for a familiar, dreaded face. And then I saw him, standing near a group of colleagues, laughing, looking every bit the confident, successful man he believed himself to be. He hadn't seen me yet. I took a deep breath, Daniel's hand a solid anchor. We started to move through the crowd, making polite small talk, heading slowly, inevitably, in his direction. He glanced up, his eyes sweeping across the room, and then they landed on me. His smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion, then recognition. He probably wondered why I was here. Company event? Maybe tagging along with an acquaintance. His gaze shifted to Daniel, standing beside me, his hand still holding mine. The confusion deepened. He knew Daniel, of course. Everyone at his level knew the senior partners, the heads of departments. But he didn't know Daniel knew me. Not like this. Not like this. We were only a few feet away now. His colleagues were still talking, oblivious. My ex's face was a study in rapidly shifting emotions. The confusion was giving way to dawning realization, and then something else. Disbelief. Alarm. His eyes darted between my face and Daniel's, searching for an explanation, for a crack in the reality unfolding before him. Daniel stopped in front of the group, offering a polite, almost casual nod to my ex. His voice was calm, measured, cutting through the noise of the room like a laser. "Good evening, Mark," he paused, then turned slightly towards me, his smile warm and genuine, his hand tightening just perceptibly on mine. "Mark, I don't believe you've formally met my wife, Sarah." The air went still. The chattering of his colleagues faded into a dull roar. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Mark's face, it was a masterpiece of horror. His jaw slackened. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes widened to the point of bulging. It wasn't just surprise. It was the visceral shock of a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps realized he was staring into the abyss. His gaze dropped to our joined hands, lingered there for a beat, then snapped back up to Daniel's face. He stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Just a strangled, inarticulate sound. His colleagues finally noticed, their polite smiles freezing as they sensed the shift in temperature. This was the climax. The moment of confrontation, years in the making, not with shouting or accusations, but with a quiet, undeniable truth. I stood there, calm, a strange stillness encompassing me. There was no triumphant smirk on my face, no cruel satisfaction. Just a profound sense of peace, of rightness. The man who had dismissed me as irreplaceable was now staring, dumbfounded and terrified, at the man who had replaced him in my life, and who also happened to hold the reins of his career. Then came the twist, delivered not with fanfare, but with the quiet finality of a door closing forever. Daniel didn't linger. He nodded again, his expression now subtly different, less convivial, more managerial. Actually, Mark, Daniel's voice was still even, but there was a new edge to it. I was just looking for you. Could you step away for a moment? There's something we need to discuss in private. Related to that Q3 performance review we touched upon last week. Q3 performance review. The words hung in the air between them. I knew enough from Daniel to know Q3 reviews weren't standard procedure, especially not pulled aside at a gala. It was code. Code for something serious. Something bad. Mark clearly knew it too. His face crumpled further, panic replacing shock. His eyes flickered desperately to his colleagues, then back to Daniel, then, briefly, to me, a silent plea mixed with dawning despair. This wasn't just me showing up with a new partner, this was me showing up with the man who was, right now, pulling the rug out from under him. Daniel's integrity was absolute. He wouldn't fire Mark because he was my ex. But he would act on poor performance, on lack of integrity, on conduct unbecoming of a manager, especially if that conduct had come to his attention through channels he trusted, or if Mark had demonstrated those very flaws in front of him. And Mark, standing there stammering, visibly disintegrating, was putting on a masterclass in unbecoming conduct right then and there. Daniel was a firm but fair leader, but he had zero tolerance for dishonesty or disrespect. And Mark had displayed both, not just to me, but implicitly through his reaction and history, to the values Daniel held. Mark, still speechless, eyes wide with fear, nodded numbly. He mumbled something inaudible to his colleagues and followed Daniel, stumbling slightly, away from the crowd, towards a quieter corner of the ballroom. I watched them go, Mark's shoulders slumped, his carefully constructed facade shattered. It wasn't just karma. It was a direct, immediate consequence of his actions, his character, and the life I had built after he tried to break me. His final, arrogant dismissal, "You'll never find another man like me," had boomeranged with spectacular force, delivering him directly into the path of the man I did find, a man who was demonstrably better in every way that mattered, and who now held his professional fate in his hands. I didn't need to hear their conversation. The look on Mark's face said it all. He was completely blindsided. The victim hadn't just survived, she had thrived, and in doing so, had become a force that inadvertently dismantled the betrayer's world. Leaving the gala felt surreal. The noise of the party faded behind us, replaced by the quiet hum of the car engine. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on my knee. I didn't ask what had happened with Mark. I knew he would tell me what he felt was appropriate, respecting both my connection and his professional boundaries. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. He won't be with the company much longer. Performance issues. And other things. Tonight just clarified things he didn't elaborate, didn't need to. I understood. The other things encompassed the character flaws that had led him to betray me, the same flaws that likely manifested in his professional life, coming to light under Daniel's scrutiny. There was no wild celebration from me, no dancing on his professional grave. Just relief. A deep, settling calm. The ghost of those 7 words, "You'll never find another man like me," finally, truly evaporated.
They sounded ridiculous now. Pathetic, even.
He was right. I hadn't found another man like him. I had found a man who valued honesty, who built others up instead of tearing them down, whose strength came from integrity, not arrogance. I had found Daniel. The aftermath wasn't about reveling in Mark's downfall. It was about the quiet rebuilding of my own life, on a foundation far stronger than the one that had crumbled. The house felt like a home again, filled not with ghosts, but with the warmth of a genuine connection. Financial worries eased. The legal battles ended, eventually settling on terms that were fair, no longer weighted down by his punitive resistance. The fear of being alone vanished, replaced by the quiet certainty of being truly seen and loved. I learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up, even when every fiber of your being screamed to stay down. It was about trusting your own worth, even when someone who claimed to love you told you you had none. It was about opening your heart again, even after it had been shattered. Mark had tried to define me by my connection to him, by his perceived irreplaceability. But my story wasn't over when he walked out the door. It was just beginning. I found a new chapter, richer, deeper, built on mutual respect and genuine love. And the man I found? He wasn't just not like my ex, he was everything my ex could never be. And that, more than any fleeting satisfaction, was the real victory. The ultimate irony was that his own arrogance, his certainty of his superiority, had blinded him. He never imagined that the woman he discarded, the one he deemed destined for a lesser life, would find happiness, stability, and vindication in the arms of the man who signed his paychecks. He thought he was irreplaceable.
Turns out he was simply replaced
by something better. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt the sting of words meant to cut you down, or the quiet triumph of proving someone wrong, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.